Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, November 1st, 2019. Happy November. Happy, what are we on All Saints Day? Is that what we are? Yeah, that's right. I think so. I forgot to check the calendar. And besides which, I'm recording this ahead of time. Surprise. It's not really Friday, November 1st to me, but it is to you. And because I don't like to leave you hanging, especially in these crazy times where so much can happen on any given day, and especially over a weekend, I thought I would put this together for you. I am on travel, personal travel, just taking a personal day, if you don't mind too much, and I hope you don't, but we need these things every once in a while, and off for I guess what we would call a long weekend. So, it being Friday for the purposes of the show, I wanted to make sure that we at least got to you with some of the stories and profiles promised along the way during the week, and we'll see. It's going to be actually difficult for me to hold out from bringing these to you earlier in the week because there's a lot of good material. But Friday, I've made up the tradition that this would be the day where we would bring you names that might become more prominent over the weekend. I don't know whether these two necessarily will pop up during the weekend, but they are becoming more important figures as the impeachment inquiry continues, and I thought I should share their names and stories with you. I think I've hinted at both of them. Might as well jump right in here, since we're not waiting for anybody else today. From a couple of days ago, I have the tweet from Noah Shachtman, the Daily Beast editor-in-chief, whose tweet caught my eye here. And then the story was then new on October 28th. Anyway, Devin Nunes aide Derek Harvey. You remember we made a mention of him earlier in the week. Derek Harvey is spreading information and misinformation about the Ukraine whistleblower to GOP lawmakers and conservative journalists. That sounded rather interesting. Thought I'd take a look at the Daily Beast's full article on this piece. Spencer Ackerman, David Brody, and Adam Rawnsley are the authors on the piece. Once again, this published on the 28th originally. Nunes' aide is leaking the Ukraine whistleblower's name, sources say. And remember, that person's name is supposed to be protected by law, but what the hell does Devin Nunes care about what the law says? He either thinks it's wrong, or doesn't care, or thinks he's getting a pardon, or thinks he'll be held up as a hero of the Soviet Union, or whatever, I don't know, for revealing the name. Let's dive in and find out what the hell this guy is up to and where he came from. A top aide to Devin Nunes has been providing conservative politicians and journalists with information and misinformation about the anonymous whistleblower who triggered I like triggered. Sounds rather dirty, though. But triggered the biggest crisis of Donald Trump's presidency, two knowledgeable sources tell the Daily Beast. Derek Harvey, who works for Nunes, the ranking Republican on the House Intelligence Committee, has provided notes for House Republicans identifying the whistleblower's name ahead of the high-profile depositions of Trump administration appointees and civil servants in the impeachment inquiry. So he's just giving it to them outright. What are they doing with it? The purpose of the notes, one source said, is to get the whistleblower's name into the record of the proceedings, which committee chairman Adam Schiff has pledged to eventually release. In other words, it's an attempt to out the anonymous official who helped trigger the impeachment inquiry. So I suppose, yeah, that's the plan. You could give him the name, and if a member of Congress just blurts it out or inserts it into a soliloquy or a question, if they're even trying to question somebody, or just shouts the name out, for that matter, like you were calling to the Howard Stern show or something. Baba Booey, whistleblower. I don't know. But I guess if you get it in the transcript, then eventually when Schiff moves to release the transcript Either the name will be released and you'll be able to point to it and say, aha, we knew all along and here it is on the record, or they'll redact the name out of the transcript and then you will attack Schiff and the transcript as being somehow unworthy or unofficial, or what are you hiding? So I think that was our speculation earlier in the week, and I still think that holds true for me now, today, even today, Friday, not just today, right now. Now, speaking of dates, on Saturday, that would have been last Saturday, the Washington Post reported that GOP lawmakers and staffers have repeatedly used the name purporting to be, that's good, purporting. See, he's listening to me. Spencer and these three. I don't know. I mean, it's the only word you can use, but I hope people are listening to me. They used the name purporting to be that of the whistleblower during the depositions. The paper named Harvey as driving lines of questioning Democrats saw as attempting to determine the political loyalties of witnesses before the inquiry. That is pretty interesting. Is that a piece that we read? I think so. I recognize the picture there. So, okay, so this is sort of follow-up to that and more explanation of what Derek Harvey is up to. That must have been the article that we read that first named Harvey for us. So, okay. Again, the Washington Post's reporting then is that Derek Harvey was prompting members to pursue lines of questioning that, for one thing, was attempting to determine the political loyalties of the witnesses, which is improper, and then also inserting the name of the purported whistleblower, or the purported name of the whistleblower, I suppose, into the record. A former official told the Post that Harvey, quote, was passing notes to GOP lawmakers the entire time ex-NSC Russia staffer Fiona Hill was testifying. And again, I think when that came up in the Post piece, we noted that is okay. It is what staff does in these things all the time. The question is on the content of the notes, I guess, and the intent of passing them, those notes. Exposing the identity of the whistleblower and attacking our client would do nothing to undercut the validity of the complaint's allegations, said Mark Zaid, one of the whistleblower's attorneys. And I've never been sure whether he's Zaid or Zaid either. So I apologize to him if we got that wrong. What it would do, however, is put that individual and their family at risk of harm. Right? You see what's going on. There's more to it than just that to the quote. But again, exposing the identity of the whistleblower at this point doesn't do anything to undermine the validity of the complaint. The complaint has been validated by numerous other witnesses whose names we know by now. All this would do, the only thing that can come out of identifying the whistleblower is exposing them to risk. As he says, not only the risk for them, but also for their family. Perhaps more important, it would deter future whistleblowers from coming forward in subsequent administrations, Democratic or Republican. That is true. Zaid, has represented the Daily Beast, they have to note, I guess by way of disclosure, in freedom of information lawsuits against the federal government. The whistleblower is not Harvey's only target. Another is a staffer for the House Intelligence Committee, for the Democrats on that committee, whom the Daily Beast has agreed not to name due to concerns about reprisals against this staffer. Harvey, both sources said, has spread a false story alleging that the whistleblower contacted the staffer ahead of raising the internal alarm about President Trump's July 25th phone call, attempting to get a favor from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to damage Trump's rival Joe Biden. I think we all knew the backstory. And we've heard the reports of this story before, that it sort of came out in the form from Republican tellings that Adam Schiff had advanced notice of the complaint and worked with the whistleblower, or then even wrote the whistleblower's complaint for him or her. You remember how they perverted that story and tried to come up with something juicier. All right. In right-wing circles, contact with Schiff is meant to discredit the whistleblower as partisan. as opposed to I spoke to the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. I suppose he could have opted to speak to the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, but of course the Senate doesn't vote on impeachment. That's the House's province, and so I suppose it makes a certain amount of sense. Would they have spoken to a Republican intelligence chair? I don't know. They probably didn't believe that anything would go anywhere, and of course they didn't have the content of their complaint available when Nunes was chair anyway. So we'll never know. The eagerness of Republicans to go after the Intelligence Committee staffer so alarmed Democrats that they raised the issue with GOP leadership, according to a senior official on the Intelligence Committee. We are aware of these unsupported and false attacks on a respected member of our staff, the official told the Daily Beast. It is completely inappropriate, and we have previously urged the Republican leadership to address this situation. The official would not comment on any aspect of the depositions proceedings. Trump, who has called the whistleblower treasonous, has speculated basely that Schiff is the source of the whistleblower's account of the Zelensky call, even though Schiff was not on the call, and Trump's own summary of the call corroborated the whistleblower's second-hand account. And of course, all the testimony since then has corroborated it directly. Although that hasn't changed Trump's tune. He continues to say there was nothing wrong, and read the transcript, and you'll see that I did nothing wrong, and the transcript wasn't a transcript, and when we read it, it still did look like he did something tremendously wrong, and I don't know why he thinks that non-transcript transcript exonerates him. And then we found out that the transcript wasn't even accurate and made some fairly serious omissions that might even be more damning. I don't know. Derek Harvey's career has been extraordinary. It reminds me, I guess, in this sense of Kash Patel, whose career, if you want to call it that, has been rather extraordinary as well. So what's he been up to? As a Defense Intelligence Agency analyst, he played an important role in the 2007 to 2008 troop surge in Iraq. That is interesting. DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, is where Mike Flynn is from. Did they overlap? He is mentioned in here. David Petraeus. Not a member in good standing here. David Petraeus kept Harvey aboard for an intelligence billet at U.S. Central Command. Harvey aligned with another member of the counterinsurgency coterie. Wow. DIA Director Mike Flynn, there we are, and followed Flynn onto Trump's White House NSC. From there, Harvey became a crucial aide to Nunes, a pivotal Flynn and Trump ally. There is no reasonable definition of deep state that excludes Derek Harvey from elite membership. That is a good point. And think about what his track record is here. David Petraeus, Mike Flynn, Devin Nunes. 3 notorious leakers, one alleged, I allege that I continue to stick to the allegation that Mike Flynn is just an outright spy for what he did. And not even with respect to his work as Trump's initial national security advisor and campaign national security advisor with respect to Turkey and Russia and the rest. I just think he's a spy outright for having abandoned all protocols and installing an unauthorized internet connection in a secure office where he worked as Defense Intelligence Agency director, and I don't believe that he hasn't spent the rest of his life in a stockade as a result. I just don't know why that never happened. But think about that. Mike Flynn, Devin Nunes, who leaked like a sieve to not only to the press, but to the White House about an investigation of the White House activities, and David Petraeus, leaker extraordinaire as well. And Derek Harvey has been on the scene like the Forrest Gump of treason. Harvey did not respond to a request for comment. I guess I wouldn't if I had heard myself say that about me, but okay. The staffer declined to comment. A spokesperson for Nunes did not respond to a request for comment. Despite hearing of the Trump-Zelensky call secondhand, the whistleblower's account of Trump's pressure campaign against Ukraine has been corroborated by numerous witnesses before the impeachment inquiry, as well as Trump's own account of the July 25th call. Sources believe the persistent conservative focus on the whistleblower is both an attempt at deterring other would-be whistleblowers, so they're trying to do that, and discrediting the impeachment as politically motivated, though it is unclear what misconduct the whistleblower is alleged to have engaged in. They don't have to come up with that part of the story now. They just tell you that Trump is mad at that person, and that's enough for Trump allies. Influential conservatives have claimed that the whistleblower's identity is no secret at all. On October 24th, Fred Fleitz, formerly chief of staff of the NSC under John Bolton, who may or may not be defecting to the other side at this point, and a CIA official before that, claimed on CNN that OANN, Breitbart, OANN, I remember, the crazy lunatics, OANN, news, I can't remember what they were. One America News Network, is that right? That's what I think Greg mentioned them on Wednesday. Yes. Why did they come up? Who was working for them? It was Bob Livingston, that's right, who was lobbying for Ukraine, possibly at the behest of Timoshenko, about getting rid of Yovanovitch, which I really can't understand or explain. Okay. Anyway, that was the mention. So, where were we? Fred Fleitz, who was an NSC guy under Bolton and a CIA official before that, claimed on CNN that OANN, Breitbart, the House Intelligence Committee, CNN, and the White House has the name. Fleitz asserted as well that the president knows who he is. Fleitz cited no source for his information. Harvey has a history of passing on information to damage colleagues. Of course he does. He's learned from three of the worst, right? Petraeus and Flynn and Nunes. How could he ever have done anything else? Unless he's been instructing them. That's a possibility. As the Daily Beast reported in March, an April 2017 email that senior State Department official Brian Hook sent to himself, titled Derek Notes. We've heard Hook's name before too, right? Anyway, Derek Notes contained descriptions of State Department officials suspected of disloyalty or troublesomeness. So he's got a blacklist that he passes around. Examples of such disloyalty included buttering up to Clinton people. I think I would have gone with sucking up to Clinton people, buttering up of Clinton people, but anyway, that's what Hook wrote. The email is currently being examined by a State Department Inspector General investigation into department politicization. Does that come from that package of information? Is that where we heard Brian Hook's name the first time? I can't recall exactly what it was. Maybe I'll pause later on and look his name up. But I'll probably forget by the time I get a chance to do that. Harvey is not the only Nunes ally involved in the Ukraine story. A former Nunes staffer who now works on the NSC, Kash Patel, gave Trump damaging information about Ukraine, Politico recently reported. Patel was a driving force behind Nunes' efforts in 2017 and 18 to discredit the origins of the FBI investigation into Trump's campaign connections with Russian election interference. Far-right groups like the Gateway Pundit blog and the OANN TV network have run pieces naming their guess at the whistleblower's identity. The official identified by OANN and Gateway Pundit has been a target for fringe conservative media figures even before the whistleblower filed his complaint to the DNI Inspector General's office. So I guess they're just continuing that program, whether they're right or not. GOP criticism of the whistleblower has focused on their contact with Democratic investigators as people like Harvey spread the idea that they were in cahoots. That line of attack went into overdrive on October 2nd when Schiff's camp confirmed that the whistleblower reached out to the Intelligence Committee before filing a formal complaint in order to get guidance on how to report possible wrongdoing within the intelligence community. But the whistleblower, per a spokesman for Schiff, did not tell the chairman the content of the complaint nor the identity of the whistleblower. Still, that seemed to contradict Schiff's statement in late September that Democrats had, quote, not spoken directly, quote, unquote, with the whistleblower, a remark the congressman later told the Daily Beast he regretted he did not make much more clear. Those statements have provided fuel for allegations from Trump and his allies that the whistleblower and Democrats were engaged in some unseemly coordination before the fact, or that they did not follow the proper whistleblower laws. Zaid, meanwhile, that's the pronunciation I've decided to go with, has stressed that the whistleblower acted properly and without any kind of coordination or interference. The whistleblower drafted the complaint entirely on their own. Legal counsel Andrew Bakaj, B-A-K-A-J, perhaps that's the pronunciation, Bakaj provided guidance on process, but was not involved in the drafting of the document and did not review it in advance, Zaid told ABC News on October 2nd. In fact, none of the legal team saw the complaint until it was publicly released by Congress, Zaid said. To be unequivocally clear, no member or congressional staff had any input into or reviewed the complaint before it was submitted to the Intelligence Community Inspector General. That Inspector General, Michael Atkinson, we haven't heard much about him lately, have we, has said in letters to top lawmakers that the whistleblower's complaint was credible and urgent. Though Joseph McGuire, the acting director of National Intelligence, did not believe he had to notify the intelligence committees of the complaint as required by law, he nevertheless testified before lawmakers on September 26th that the whistleblower followed the steps every step of the way. All right, and that is that's the end of the piece. I don't know, I felt like it was winding up to some big finish there, but I think that's big enough. Very interesting to hear about him and his wild career and all the various traders he served, to see him linked with Kash Patel. And Devin Nunes, I guess, just loves maintaining a shop full of lunatics, and it hasn't done him any favors so far. But okay, just thought I'd bring up the name in the background, given that it's a Friday show, and we'll see whether he explodes into the news anytime soon. Hey, while we are on this subject, I've got something for you that you might think is interesting. Going back to Kash Patel, who was, of course, just mentioned in the previous article, something new here from Politico, Natasha Bertrand, as a matter of fact. Testimony, I guess Vindman's testimony reveals that Nunes Alkalite misrepresented himself to Trump as Ukraine expert. This is, of course, talking about Kash Patel. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman also testified on Tuesday that the National Security Council staffer Kash Patel fed the president disinformation about Ukraine. So he's really on a roll here, isn't he? The decorated Army officer who testified to House investigators on Tuesday told lawmakers that a close associate of Republican Representative Devin Nunes misrepresented himself to President Donald Trump in an effort to involve himself further in Ukraine policy. Remember, we were a little bit at a loss when we were talking about Patel the other day as to just how he gained the reputation of having any Ukraine knowledge at all. Well, this is according to two people familiar with the closed-door deposition from Vindman. Vindman, the National Security Council's top Ukraine expert, so he's in a position to know, told lawmakers that after attending Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's inauguration in May as part of a delegation led by Energy Secretary Rick Perry, Vindman has been looking forward to debriefing Trump and giving a positive account of Zelensky's vision for Ukraine's future. The U.S. government policy community's view is that the election of Zelensky and the promise of reforms to eliminate corruption will lock in Ukraine's Western-leaning trajectory and allow Ukraine to realize its dream of a vibrant democracy and economic prosperity, Vindman said in his opening statement. But he was instructed at the last second not to attend the debriefing. How odd is that? Do not attend the debriefing, Vindman told lawmakers, because Trump's advisors worried it might confuse the president. Your world scares and confuses me. I'm just, unfrozen caveman president, I guess. Trump believed at the time that Kashyap Patel, a longtime Nunes staffer who joined the White House in February and had no discernible Ukraine experience or expertise, was actually the NSC's top Ukraine expert instead of Vindman. So let me just stop here to emphasize it wasn't that they thought that a contrary vision of what happened and what was happening in Ukraine coming from a real expert would confuse the president given the credence he had given to the fake expert. The president was going to be confused because I thought you told me that Cash guy was the top Ukraine expert, and now you're telling me this other guy, just because he's Ukrainian born and speaks Ukrainian and is an army colonel, and Kash Patel does nothing? He was literally confused as to who his top Ukraine expert was, which gives you an idea of how much exposure he was actually getting to real Ukraine experts when he was trying to make his stupid decisions about things. That's amazing. Vindman testified that he was told this directly by his boss at the time, NSC Senior Director for European and Russian Affairs, Fiona Hill. Hill told Vindman that she and National Security Advisor John Bolton thought it best to exclude Vindman, this is their idea, from the debriefing to avoid, quote, an uncomfortable situation. He said, wow. Well, you got another uncomfortable situation, but at least it's not uncomfortable with the president involved. It's just uncomfortable with poor Colonel Vindman here. But wow. Well, John Bolton is apparently set to testify. His lawyers at the moment, anyway, say that if he is served with a subpoena, he will show up and testify. He's willing to do so, and I guess he'd be another of the officials willing to do so in defiance of the president's orders so long as he's served with a subpoena. We'll get back to this and more after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. Except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Continuing with the political piece from Natasha Bertrand with the big reveal about Vindman's thoughts about Kash Patel. All right, let's see. Where were we when we left off? We had just revealed that Vindman found out from Fiona Hill and John Bolton that they didn't want him to participate in the debrief of the trip to Zelensky's inauguration because they were worried that the president would become scared and confused because he was under the impression that Kash Patel was his top Ukraine expert when in fact Vindman was, and this would be somehow disconcerting to the president. It's not clear what materials Patel was giving Trump, given that he has no idea what the hell's going on in Ukraine, or where he was getting them. But he was not interacting with Ukraine experts at the State Department and the Pentagon on the issue, and had never had a conversation with Vindman, the NSC's director for Ukraine, about Ukraine, or about anything for that matter, Vindman testified. So whatever he was getting, it wasn't from the experts. Patel joined the National Security Council's International Organizations and Alliances Directorate in February, and was promoted to a senior counterterrorism role around the same time as Trump's July 25th call with Zelensky, in which he urged the newly elected leader to investigate Biden and get to the bottom of Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election. So recall here that Patel joins the National Security Council's International Organizations and Alliances Directorate with no discernible skills or expertise in that area in February, but then in July is somehow promoted to a counterterrorism role, a senior one at that, which, as we recall from our reading earlier on Patel, was at least in an area where he had claimed to have previous expertise, even if he really didn't. Okay. So, Patel had previously served as Nunes's top staffer in the House Intelligence Committee, although maybe he was just lying about that. He was a staffer, and there's 6 other people who say he was the top staffer. I don't know. They were the top staffers. Maybe. I don't know. It's not in the article. I'm just wondering. So he was Nunes's top staffer on the Intel Committee and worked to discredit the FBI and DOJ officials investigating Russia's election interference because of what a great law and order guy he is. For that reason, Vindman was careful not to overtly criticize Patel so as not to anger Nunes, the ranking member of the intelligence panel, who floated in and out of the 10-hour deposition, according to a person familiar with his testimony. Vindman, a combat veteran and Purple Heart recipient who has served in the Army for more than 2 decades, joined the White House in July 2018 as a detailee from the office of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He testified on Tuesday, wearing his uniform in keeping with past practice for active members of the military. His opening statement, in which he testified that he raised alarms internally about efforts to pressure Ukraine into launching political investigations in exchange for military assistance aid, made him an immediate target of Trump's allies, who began floating a conspiracy theory late Monday night that Vindman was working as a double agent for both the Ukrainians and the United States. Of course, why not? As a matter of fact, they probably walked around with dramatic music on hand. They could play every time Vindman's name gets mentioned, right? We do the same thing. We know how that works. I bet they're doing the same thing. They probably are. You imagine walking around in the halls of Congress with that like in your pocket and saying, "Aha, Vindman." I mean, I think that would be awfully entertaining. Someone ought to think about doing it. Anyway, it would have been Trey Gowdy's thing, I bet, but he's gone now. Anyway, citing Vindman's birthplace, the Soviet Union, and a New York Times report that said Vindman met with the Ukrainians periodically to discuss how they should deal with Giuliani, Republicans began publicly questioning where Vindman's loyalties lie, and I understand that they very badly misinterpreted the New York Times reporting on that as well. It seems very clear, this is someone else's quote, who are we talking about? Oh, Sean Duffy, that guy, yeah, CNN's newest shame. It seems very clear that he is incredibly concerned about Ukrainian defense, because it's important to the national security of the United States, but whatever. That's what Duffy said on CNN on Tuesday morning. I don't know that he's concerned about American policy. That is American policy. Fox News host Laura Ingraham posited that Vindman was advising Ukraine while working inside the White House, apparently against the president's interest, leading former Deputy Assistant Attorney General John Yoo to respond, some people might call that espionage. Sure. Well, we heard a great response to that one just the other day, too. You probably know what we're talking about. Anyway, the talking point has been condemned by members of both parties as a smear of a decorated war hero. House Republican Conference Chair Liz Cheney of Wyoming called it shameful on Tuesday. Greg told us that, right? Vindman's wife called her later that day to express her appreciation, and Cheney again denounced the smear, according to 2 people with knowledge of the call. That's barely news, but what the hell? The guy Natasha needed extra words for her story, maybe. Despite the bipartisan outcry, the insinuation made its way to the deposition room. At one point, Representative Lee Zeldin, Republican of New York, began asking questions implying that Vindman had been working both sides, expressing alarm that Vindman, quote, gave the Ukrainians guidance, and asking how many times he spoke with Ukrainian officials, one of the people in the room at the time said. That's literally part of Vindman's job as the NSC's Ukraine director, this person said. Zeldin was pretty quickly rebuked over that line of questioning by the Democrats. A spokesman for Zeldin's office denied that he had implied Vindman had dual loyalties. This is just another reason why these transcripts should be immediately released, the spokesperson said. You'd see just how badly your sources are misleading you about what's actually happening behind closed doors. All right, I'd like to see that one. Republican Representative John Ratcliffe also challenged Vindman, because he's totally in a position to do so, right? Who wrote in his opening statement that he was concerned by Trump's July 25th call because he, quote, did not think it was proper to demand that a foreign government investigate a U.S. citizen, to show the investigators where the word demand appeared in the call record. Vindman explained that he considered the request to implicitly be a demand because it was the president of the most powerful country in the world asking for, quote, a favor from a much lesser world power, according to the people familiar with his testimony. He compared it to how he would take it as an army officer if a general asked him to do something. I think it's a pretty good comparison. All right. Well, just wanted to get that in there. It was mostly about other things, but the Kash Patel reference I thought was very helpful and worth keeping in mind, and I'm going to have to work on not pronouncing it like Trump surely pronounces it Kash Patel. Kash, perhaps, with a longer A. Okay, very, very interesting. All right, on to our next topic. Now, the next promised topic was the ProPublica story about John Solomon, the wacko semi-journalist, semi-Republican operative, I guess, who until recently was working at The Hill and who has revealed himself essentially to be an off-the-books campaign operative for Trump, working alongside Giuliani, I guess, to try and frame up this Biden story out of Ukraine as something legitimate and being investigated by real newspapers. I guess that was his role in all of this. ProPublica has got this piece by Jake Pearson, Mike Spies, and J. David McSwain. Again, guessing at pronunciations. I think we've done Mike Spies before, and I said I knew someone in all the way from grade school through high school who had the same spelling of the last name, and that's how she went with it. All right. Best guess. Anyway, how a veteran reporter worked with Giuliani's associates to launch the Ukraine conspiracy. I guess that sums it up. Lev Parnas, recently indicted for foreign influence in U.S. elections, collaborated closely with The Hill's John Solomon to fuel spurious allegations involving the Bidens and Ukraine. This is an October 25th piece, and begins this way. Last March, a veteran Washington reporter taped an interview with a Ukrainian prosecutor that sparked a disinformation campaign alleging Joe Biden pressured Ukrainians into removing a prosecutor investigating a company, this is a long chain of events, because of its ties to the former vice president's son. Wow, I should have interrupted that. The interview and subsequent columns, conducted and written by a writer for The Hill newspaper, John Solomon, were the starting gun that eventually set off the impeachment inquiry into the president. Watching from the control booth of The Hill's TV studio was Lev Parnas, he is everywhere, who helped arrange the interview. Parnas and his partner Igor Fruman were working with the president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, to promote a story that it was Democrats and not Republicans who colluded with a foreign power in the 2016 election. To great effect, obviously. Federal prosecutors in Manhattan indicted the duo this month on allegations that they illegally funneled foreign money into U.S. political campaigns, which is actually what we said you guys were doing, and then we caught you doing it. And talk about your projection. We caught you doing it so that you would be able to plant the story that someone else was actually the one doing it. How interesting. Interviews and company records obtained by ProPublica show Parnas worked closely with Solomon to facilitate his reporting, including helping with translation and interviews. I guess he loves translating. He just does it for everybody. Solomon also shared files he obtained related to the Biden allegations with Parnas, according to a person familiar with the exchange. And the two men shared yet another, only recently revealed connection. Solomon's personal lawyers connected the journalist to Parnas and later hired the Florida businessman as a translator in their representation of a Ukrainian oligarch. which of course leads us to the conclusion, which I think we called out the other day when we first discovered this story, that John Solomon's lawyers, oddly enough, happened to be diGenova and Tensing. Everybody's lawyers. They're all over the place. John Solomon's interview and columns were widely amplified. Giuliani praised them, and Trump said he deserved a Pulitzer Prize. Fox News hosts Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, and Lou Dobbs trumpeted them. They later became a key point in the CIA whistleblower complaint that set the impeachment inquiry in motion. Parnas's unusual and extensive involvement in the production of the stories has not been previously reported. Solomon, 52, told ProPublica his reporting was accurate and defended his sourcing, saying no one knew there was anything wrong with Lev Parnas at the time. A questionable assertion, but you didn't. I could believe, perhaps, that you didn't know, but it probably wouldn't have mattered to you, and you'd be more excited if you did know. But he was a well-known fraudster, just maybe not in your circles. I mean, not in mine either. I can admit that much, right? Everybody who approaches me has an angle, Solomon said. My mother has an angle when she calls me. Okay? A lawyer for Parnas, who, along with Fruman, has pleaded not guilty, did not return requests for comment. More than a year before his Ukraine columns published, The Hill had serious concerns about Solomon's credibility and conflicts of interest. It's interesting how, at this point in time, and I guess it's good to put it together as a theme for Friday, the number of people who have risen to positions of prominence who, as it turns out, if you look under the hood, have been questionable for a long time. It does also, I could copy this and put it in my Why Do I Get Out of Bed in the Morning file, would you? This is depression-inducing stuff. All right. So for more than a year before these Ukraine columns published, The Hill had serious concerns about Solomon's credibility and conflicts of interest. Hill staffers, and I don't know whether that's staffers at The Hill or staffers on Capitol Hill, but Hill, I guess it's the newspaper. Hill staffers began raising alarms, including the paper's publisher at the time, and answers it, who warned in an internal memo that Solomon was engaged in, quote, reputation-killing stuff by mixing business with journalism. In response, the Hill's management took steps to limit Solomon's reporting, rebranding him as an opinion writer, but did not prevent him from writing his Ukraine series. Nothing I did would have put the Hill's reputation at risk, Solomon said. Solomon came to the Hill, which specializes in Inside the Beltway news, in July of 2017 after a decades-long career that included stretches at the Associated Press, the Washington Post, and the Washington Times. This is a real downward trajectory, to be honest, if that's the chronology of it. His work has earned accolades, including a series examining what the FBI knew ahead of the September 11th terrorist attacks. He's now a contributor to Fox News. Brought in as an executive vice president overseeing a new digital video enterprise known as Hill TV, Hill.tv. And again, why do you get out of bed in the morning? I mean, the guy's I guess he's got some track record, but then also, I guess if the concern was at the Hill about his credibility, they wouldn't have known that until after they hired him, I guess, but they hire him in as executive vice president, and already they're having a problem with the guy. How interesting. All right, well, anyway, he gets hired on to run Hill.tv, and Solomon continued to operate as a journalist, publishing news articles in the paper while also playing a role on the Hill's business side. That began to trouble colleagues within months of his hiring, according to internal memos and interviews with current and former staffers. In late October 2017, The Hill published a story on the decisive role of Senator Susan Collins of Maine, of course, in the upcoming vote on the Trump administration's tax bill. The article, authored by two journalists who reported to Solomon, included a quote from the executive director of Job Creators Network, a conservative group that claimed the bill would help small business owners in Maine. Soon after, Johanna Derlega, or maybe Derlega, I don't know, Derlega. It's not a capital L or anything, but Derlega, Johanna Derlega, then the Hill's publisher, wrote 2 memos to the company's president, Richard Beckman, worrying that Solomon was tearing down the traditional wall separating the business side and the news coverage. Tearing down the wall, how interesting. For a Trump supporter, anyway. She noted that Solomon had negotiated a nearly $160,000 advertising deal with Job Creators Network, targeting business owners in Maine. Solomon then had a quote from that group's director inserted in the story. That is pretty questionable, isn't it? Solomon, quote, pops by the advertising bullpen almost daily to discuss big deals he's about to close, Derlega wrote, adding, if a media reporter gets a hold of this story, it could destroy us. It hasn't yet, but it's out there now. Well, so I guess you're wrong, right? I'm reading it, and you're not destroyed yet. So I don't know what to make of it, but I understand the sentiment. It's good to worry about that. While I highlight this one example, John has been given the freedom and possibly financial upside to work with advertisers while clearly sitting within editorial, Derlega wrote. 6 months later, in April 2018, Derlega was forced out of the Hill. The Hill's owner, president, and top editors haven't responded to detailed questions about Derlega's memos and Solomon's tenure at the paper. The spokesman for the advertiser, Job Creators Network, didn't respond to an email seeking comment. In interviews with ProPublica this week, and I'm going to change my pronunciation to the more anglicized ProPublica, I think, Solomon repeatedly declined to discuss his activities on the Hill's business side, saying, I just simply can't talk about anything business related with the Hill. Okay. I mean, just asserts that. I don't know what the reason is, but maybe he'll get sued. A month later, the paper's editor-in-chief, Bob Cusack, emailed staff that, quote, effective immediately, Solomon would no longer publish stories under the banner of news, but instead would be an opinion contributor. From this new perch, Solomon broke in early spring what seemed to be an explosive piece of news. Claims by Yuri Lutsenko, then Ukraine's top prosecutor, that a U.S. diplomat serving under President Barack Obama presented him a list of people and groups he could not prosecute. Additionally, Lutsenko said that he was reviving a probe into the Ukrainian natural gas company Burisma Holdings, seeking to determine whether Joe Biden, as vice president, interfered with the initial inquiry to protect his son Hunter, who sat on Burisma's board. Behind the scenes, Parnas had been central to connecting Solomon with Lutsenko. In a March 2019 email that included the businessman, the columnist wrote that he'd, quote, just got word from Lev that the prosecutor general has agreed to do an interview tomorrow. Parnas watched Lutsenko's interview live inside the control room of the Hill's TV studio. Solomon explained that he called in the businessman to act as a translator, but in the end his services were not needed. Solomon recalls first encountering Parnas through Pete Sessions, the once powerful Texas Republican member of Congress who is now in the middle of the Trump impeachment inquiry. Sessions accepted campaign donations from Parnas and Fruman and had met with the two men as they sought to oust an American diplomat in Ukraine. I guess we might as well throw in here that I saw Empty Wheel making a big deal of this too. I'll have to see if I can't dig this up, but making a big deal of the fact that Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader in the House, likewise has accepted campaign donations from Parnas and Fruman, and so far has at least been unable to document his claim or initial hint that he was going to return those donations. I guess that hasn't happened yet, but I'll see if I can't dig up Empty Wheel's claims about that and share them with you. But do keep that in mind, because that's important too. After all, you'll remember that McCarthy, as a part of that recorded conversation, the secretly recorded conversation in which he said, I think Putin pays Trump, the whole conversation was, of course, about how Russia was using its money, power, military influence to undermine democracy in Ukraine. And then we find out later on. So he gets advance warning of that, and all he can say is, duh, Putin pays Trump. Well, now Putin's friends, the pro-Russian Ukrainians, are paying McCarthy. And I guess we're all supposed to pay attention to Trump instead. But well, we got something on McCarthy on this too. All right. Let's see. Empty Wheels tweet not immediately obvious to me, but I think I might be searching in the wrong place for it. Let's continue with this and come back to it later. Solomon, let's see, recalls first encountering Parnas through Pete Sessions. Right, Sessions accepted campaign donations from Parnas and Fruman, met them as they sought to oust an American diplomat in Ukraine. You know, that's Yovanovitch. Later, Sessions wrote a letter to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo urging him to replace the envoy, Marie Yovanovitch, who had been the subject of extensive criticism in the conservative media. This story is about how that sort of thing happens, I guess. She was later fired and is a key witness for House Democrats trying to impeach the president. Sessions, who has denied knowledge of the campaign finance scheme laid out by prosecutors, told ProPublica that he has no connection to Solomon. I don't know John, he said. I wish his nickname was Jack. Solomon says his personal attorneys, Joe DeGeneva and Victoria Tensing, a husband and wife legal team that regularly represents conservative luminaries, and I guess also this guy, set up his first formal meeting with Parnas. So what was it that, wasn't it earlier that Parnas had been central in connecting Solomon with Lutsenko, and Solomon first encountered Parnas through Pete Sessions, according to his recollection. But then just here, Solomon says his personal attorneys, DeGeneva and Tensing, set up his first formal meeting with Parnas. So how does Solomon recall first encountering Parnas through Sessions? Maybe you'll see if that's explained, or he's just giving two stories that no one's noticing. I don't know. Solomon says his personal attorneys, Geneva and Tensing, set up his first formal meeting with Parnas. Oh, okay, maybe he first encounters him through Sessions, and he first has a formal meeting with Parnas through DeGeneva and Tensing. He asserted that his editors were aware that he was seeking help from DeGeneva and Tensing on matters concerning Ukraine. I was doing that as an extra layer of protection, Solomon said, and so everything was above board. Everybody knew about it. I was just trying to be careful. DeGeneva and Tensing did not respond to a request for comment. As he compiled material for subsequent columns, Solomon and Parnas continued to work closely. In late March, less than a week after the first piece featuring Lutsenko appeared in The Hill, Solomon sent files via Dropbox to Parnas containing financial records purporting to be connected to Biden's son. Around the same time, Solomon also sent Tensing and DeGeneva what appeared to be an advance copy of a Ukraine-related story. The Daily Beast reported that the email was included in a State Department Inspector General's office package of material turned over to lawmakers. Okay, that would be the weird package that came up at the hearing right after the initial opening of inquiries into the whistleblowers report. You remember this? Full of essentially full of stuff that was being circulated by Giuliani and his associates, trying to get real people in the State Department to believe in this Ukraine story. But maybe it was only limited to the idiots that they knew would buy it because Trump told them to. Anyway, Solomon acknowledged that Parnas helped set up the Lutsenko interview, but he says he had originally requested it through official channels. Solomon maintains his relationship with the businessman was a typical one a reporter would have with a source. Lev would call me, and he said offer things he was hearing on the ground, and I would look into some things. Okay. Just some things. As Solomon's relationship with Parnas developed, he learned over time that the businessman was working for many people, or several people, in Ukraine, including Giuliani and Solomon's lawyers. Politico first reported Solomon's lawyers also representing the Ukrainian oligarch. Giuliani hasn't responded to messages seeking comment. And they haven't named the oligarch here, but I think they think they did, but they must mean Dmytro Firtash in this. Solomon defended his work, including his reporting on the so-called Do Not Prosecute list, which he said went through enormous efforts. He went through enormous efforts to verify. At the end of the day, Solomon said, it doesn't matter what Lev Parnas did, it matters what I did. But a month after Lutsenko's Hill TV appearance, the former Ukrainian prosecutor backed off all his allegations. He told a Ukrainian language publication that he himself was the one who had asked the U.S. ambassador for the list of supposedly untouchable figures. The State Department said there never was any such list, calling it an outright fabrication. And Lutsenko told the Los Angeles Times last month that he saw no evidence of wrongdoing that would justify an investigation into Biden's son's business dealings in his country. Weird. We'll be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. Well, that's actually the end of the article right before the break. I sped up a little bit so that we could get that all fit in before the top of the hour break. But that left us with only 1 minute to figure out exactly what we would be doing next. I guess I could start by sharing with you this odd tidbit that you will likely have seen by airtime, but in case you didn't, I just thought this was kind of funny. Ann Coulter, constitutional scholar Ann Coulter, getting in a bit of a Twitter tiff with somebody, and why, I'm not really sure. I guess the first piece of news out of this is that Ann Coulter apparently follows or otherwise pays attention to the tweets of a Twitter denizen known as Cat Turd. I don't really know. I mean, people all have sorts of weird names. That's true. This is Cat Turd 2, as a matter of fact. So I guess the guy needed to be Cat Turd, and Cat Turd was already taken, so he's Cat Turd 2. There's no space in this. Catturd 2, and I don't know whether that's a play on the guy's name or he just wants to be a cat turd but couldn't be the original cat turd. Anyway, commenting on the Thursday vote on the House floor on the ground rules for the impeachment inquiry going forward, Cat Turd wanted to note as he said, she says in the tweet here, for all you foolish Tulsi Gabbard fans, and this is a person, by the way, who describes themselves as a MAGA person, although, I mean, maybe it's tongue-in-cheek. I don't know. The MAGA turd who talks crap. The S word is what they actually use here. But I guess that's the person's following. For all you foolish Tulsi Gabbard fans, from the Republican side, I guess, she just voted for the illegal impeachment coup. She's just a better-looking Nancy Pelosi. That's the sum total of the wisdom here from Cat Turd. But it gets worse, because constitutional scholar, remember when they called her that? Constitutional scholar Ann Coulter, the real deal from the verified account and everything, weighs in to say, no, she didn't, by way of defense, I guess, of Tulsi Gabbard. So we're talking to two people who are, I guess, I don't know, or at least closely watching Tulsi Gabbard's following among Republicans as a foil, I guess, spoiler in the Democratic race. Says, no, Tulsi Gabbard didn't vote for this thing. But wait till you get a load of the reason why. Tulsi is a, all caps here, senator. Meaning she's in the Senate, again, all caps, and doesn't vote on House, caps, resolutions. Except, of course, the underlying problem here being that, of course, Tulsi is a member of the House and did vote on the House resolution and did vote exactly as Cat Turd said. So I guess the upshot here is that a cat turd is smarter than Ann Coulter. That's a very, anybody can make a mistake, but of course it's hilarious that you would make the mistake and do it in all caps so that everybody could make sure that they can point and laugh afterward. Really, if you're going to be that strident about it, just look it up. She's not a senator, and I don't know how you make that mistake, quite honestly, but let's say you make it offhand. Okay, fine. Why do it in all caps? That's Ann Coulter for you. That's her business. We'll move on from there and on to something a little bit more relevant. How about now? Okay, so now that impeachment is a household word, as we learned from the abbreviated pundit roundup on Thursday, let's make things really fun and throw another name into the impeachment mix, but a different possible impeachment. I don't think they'll ever get around to this one. But just for fun, because it's Friday, let's add this story. Alex Henderson, writing at Salon, or actually apparently originally at Alternet and now reprinted in Salon, has this very interesting story. DOJ court filing reveals FBI's reason for withholding information on Kavanaugh background check. Yeah, Brett Kavanaugh. During the confirmation process for Kavanaugh in 2018, the FBI conducted a superficial background check. You'll remember all of that, right? Now the body of the article, which refers, interestingly, to another piece for some more background information. Maybe we'll follow up if we need a deeper look at this afterwards. The Salon piece reads, during the confirmation process for U.S. Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh in 2018, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, you may know them as the FBI, conducted a superficial background check. A Freedom of Information Act lawsuit was later filed seeking information on that probe, and on October 25th of this year, the U.S. Department of Justice, again, helpfully abbreviated DOJ, filed a motion for summary judgment in response to the lawsuit, which Colin Kalmbacher discusses in an October 28th article for Law and Crime. I opened up that article and took a look. It is very detailed, and I think this article in Salon covers the highlights, but we might end up diving into that Law and Crime piece. For non-lawyers, motion for summary judgment is essentially it's a motion that you probably understand to get an expedited ruling. Basically, after all of the pleadings are made, in the beginning of the process, you can basically ask the judge in this lawsuit, in a civil case here, we think that the situation is such that if you simply accept the story that both sides have given you, you will find that as a matter of law, and in other words, that there's no reason to go to a jury, that this can be decided as a matter of law based on the facts as presented by both sides. The side usually moving for a summary judgment would be the one so confident of its legal case that it can, one, simply stand by happily and say whatever the other side told you should be assumed to be true. Even so, it doesn't state, the argument is that it doesn't state a case that they could possibly win or prove, or that even alleges an injury that can be compensated for by a court. So the DOJ here is saying that the plaintiffs just don't have a legal leg to stand on in suing us under the Freedom of Information Act for whatever information it is that they think we've gathered. So, okay, well, they've filed that. I guess we could take a look at the motion and read it, but I don't know if that would enlighten us any. The Freedom of Information Act request originally was filed in October of last year, 2018, by Jason Leopold, a reporter for BuzzFeed News. I see it BuzzFeed now. I think we've known that for quite a while, but I try and remember where people are working these days. Leopold, Kalmbacher notes, requested two documents. One, a copy of the final report sent to the White House and the Senate Judiciary Committee on either October 3rd or October 4th, 2018 on Kavanaugh. And two, all interview notes, investigative notes pertaining to the FBI's investigation into allegations leveled against Mr. Kavanaugh. Okay. In 2018, Kavanaugh became the most controversial U.S. Supreme Court nominee since Justice Clarence Thomas in 1991. Palo Alto University psychology professor Christine Blasey Ford alleged that Kavanaugh had attempted to rape her at a party in Maryland in 1982, an allegation he vehemently denied, and other women came forward with allegations of sexual misconduct against President Donald Trump's nominee, also President Donald Trump, but okay, including Deborah Ramirez and Julie Swetnick. But Ford was the only one who testified before the U.S. Senate during the confirmation process. Various backstories about why that happened. Kalmbacher, discussing Leopold's lawsuit, explains, at first it seemed as if the FBI was keen to wash their hands of the Kavanaugh imbroglio. The agency uncharacteristically acknowledged the request and assigned it for expedited processing on the same day the Kavanaugh document request was filed. Then came the Stonewall. A month passed, and the FBI produced 0 responsive documents. After that, Kalmbacher notes, nearly 1 year of legal wrangling followed, and on Friday, according to Kalmbacher, that was, I guess, last Friday, the FBI moved to have the case dismissed by arguing that they've already released enough information and that what they haven't yet released is covered by one of the several statutory exceptions to the Freedom of Information Act, hence the summary judgment motion. Kalmbacher notes that the court filing from Friday refers to information that is, quote, unquestionably private and, quote, could subject Judge Kavanaugh and others to harassment or embarrassment in their private lives, unquote. The filing explains much of the information requested by plaintiffs, both in the supplemental background investigation file and the tip records, relates to Judge Kavanaugh's alleged conduct as a teenager and young adult, decades before his distinguished career in public service began, and does not concern the performance of his public duties. In 2018, Kavanaugh's critics argued that given how disturbing the allegations being made against him were, the FBI should have conducted a much more thorough and comprehensive investigation of him. And that's it. I mean, that's where they leave it. Yeah, they should have. But it's interesting. I guess really now I can see how much I really want more detail. Let's take a look at the Law and Crime article about this. This is Colin Kalmbacher's piece directly. DOJ court filing reveals FBI's justification for withholding Brett Kavanaugh background check info. It won't get into what that information is, of course, but just a little bit better explanation, although I got the sense that he wasn't entirely satisfied with the explanation, why the DOJ thinks, though it has information that could be incredibly damaging, it doesn't have to reveal it under the Freedom of Information Act. The story begins, as we were told, DOJ filed a motion for summary judgment. And now I'm just curious about the motion and how it reads, and is it very long? And I guess it is not. It won't tell you very much, I guess. It's just one paragraph here. Pursuant to Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 56, you can look it up, and Local Rule 7H, Defendant Federal Bureau of Investigation respectfully moves for summary judgment on all claims in this case. The motion is supported by accompanying... Oh, and there's another memorandum, so I guess we won't see that. That'll be the meat of the stuff. Supported by the accompanying memorandum of points and authorities in support of defendant's motion for summary judgment, statement of material facts, as to which there is no genuine dispute, and the declaration of David M. Hardy. The proposed order is also attached, and just giving us the motion itself. We learn a little lesson there, that if you say you've got the motion for summary judgment and you're being handed that, you're likely to be handed just that one pager that says, well, I'm moving for summary judgment. All the reasons why I should be awarded summary judgment are in a supplemental memo, which no one is linking to. So that's a little bit of a disappointment. Anyway, I guess we'll get back to the law and crime piece here. So where were we? DOJ filed a motion for summary judgment in response to a FOIA lawsuit aimed at the FBI's controversial supplemental background check on Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Now, that's a mouthful of alphabet soup, so here's a bit of a backstory. In October 2018, this much we learned, BuzzFeed news reporter and FOIA expert Jason Leopold, he files a lot of these things, filed FOIA requests for the following FBI documents. Those are the ones we heard about before. He wanted a copy of the report that the White House and Senate Judiciary Committee got, and all the interview notes and investigative notes, FD 302s, those are the FBI forms that you file reports of interviews from witnesses, etc. So he wanted the 302s relating or referring to the FBI investigation into allegations leveled against Mr. Kavanaugh. At first, it seemed as if the FBI was keen to, remember this, wash their hands of the Kavanaugh imbroglio, that the agency uncharacteristically acknowledged the request and assigned it for expedited processing the same day that they got it. Nearly a year of legal wrangling followed, right? We didn't hear anything. A month passed. No responsive documents. According to the FOIA lawsuit filed by Leopold and BuzzFeed in November of 2018, in addition to granting expedited processing that same day, the FBI also informed Leopold and BuzzFeed unusual circumstances applied to the processing of the Kavanaugh request. A year of legal wrangling follows. Then on Friday, the FBI moves for summary judgment. And that's where we are. Okay, what hasn't been released, or what's been released, isn't exactly a documentary treasure trove. Remember, of course, they're saying we deserve summary judgment because we've already released enough information, and that's all you really are entitled to, and you should leave us alone, essentially. Okay, so let's see what we've got here. What has been released hasn't been a treasure trove, as they say. The filing notes here, the FBI reviewed a total of 2,579 responsive pages and released 23 pages in full and 2,029 pages in part. The FBI also withheld 527 pages in full pursuant to the FOIA exemptions allowed by law, or because the pages were duplicates of other records processed in this case. The motion continues. So, what's in that unreleased pile of FBI documents? The public may never know for sure, but the filing does give an explanation as to why many of those materials were not disclosed. And here a quote from that I guess the memo that went along with the motion. It says, here, both in the supplemental background investigation file and the tip records, the character of the information the FBI protected, which is highly personal and could subject Judge Kavanaugh and others to harassment or embarrassment in their private lives, is unquestionably private, Indeed, the FBI concluded that disclosure of this information, quote, could reasonably be expected to subject Judge Kavanaugh to further derogatory inferences and criticism, unquote, and cause undue attention and embarrassment to his family, which I guess means they got him on something. They just don't think it's relevant to his being a judge, which, is a judgment call, to say the least. And again, another quote from another passage taken from the memo from the motion. Here, the supplemental background investigation was specifically created in response to allegations about alcohol consumption and sexual behavior. Moreover, much of the investigation requested by plaintiffs, or rather the information requested by plaintiffs, both in the supplemental background investigation file and the tip records, relates to Judge Kavanaugh's alleged conduct as a teenager and young adult, decades before his distinguished career in public service began, and thus does not concern the performance of his public duties. Thus, whatever sacrifices to his privacy Judge Kavanaugh has made by taking public office do not, under these circumstances, they are arguing, extend to information that the FBI might have compiled regarding his youth. The DOJ's motion, the article continues, also contains a 54-page memo. There is a link to the 54-page memo, with significant details about the FBI's confessedly limited inquiry into allegations of sexual assault against Kavanaugh, alleged binge drinking, and his other activities as a high school and college student. The memo helpfully notes, and I don't think it has the juicy details, but I might take a look at that memo later on. This also from the memo. The case is about the follow-up inquiry that the FBI performed at the request of the White House counsel's office on behalf of the president, after allegations of misconduct against Judge Kavanaugh emerged on or around September 2018. Okay, should be probably in or around. Specifically, an authorized official within the White House counsel's office sent a series of emails to the FBI on behalf of the president requesting that the FBI conduct limited inquiries, including interviews with specified individuals to ask questions regarding particular topics and allegations detailed in various materials the White House sent to the FBI. And now back to the article. And why were many of those documents withheld? Because President Donald Trump made the decision to ask the White House counsel's office to ask the FBI to initiate the supplementary background investigation into then nominee Kavanaugh. What is that supposed to mean? Is that supposed to mean that he requested that they withhold these documents as well? The memo explains its reasoning somewhat circularly here. That is to say, in circular fashion. Over the course of the supplemental background investigation, the FBI incrementally transferred the contents of the supplemental background investigation file via fax to the White House counsel's office. The White House counsel's office has confirmed this fact, and in any event, many of the pages in the file are on their face authored or solicited and received by the White House counsel's office. For instance, the emails between FBI agents and the White House official, in which the official requested the supplemental background investigation and identified individuals to interview as well as interview topics, plainly constitute information authored and solicited by the White House. In other words, the FBI is claiming the so-called presidential communications privilege to FOIA requests because the Kavanaugh FBI investigation file includes multiple documents that were sent by White House attorneys to the FBI. And because said file includes multiple documents sent to the White House by the FBI, and communications back and forth between the FBI and the president. In short, the file was requested on behalf of and provided to the president to assist him in a fundamentally constitutional matter of presidential decision-making, whether to continue with the nomination of Judge Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, the filing argues. Moreover, disclosure would inhibit the president's ability to engage in effective communications and decision-making because it would interfere with his ability to seek and obtain candidate information regarding judicial nominations, which is precisely the harms that the presidential communications privilege is intended to prevent. Wow. So, that is rather circular. Do you see how it is so? Essentially, what they're saying is we don't know what they got, the FBI. But even if you assume they nailed him dead to rights on 25 rape charges, right? What they're arguing here is, even if that's the case, the point is you can't get it because it's protected by presidential communications privilege. How so? How is information from outside witnesses that Brett Kavanaugh engaged in blatant sexual misconduct on numerous occasions subject to presidential communications privilege? Because the FBI says we told the president about it. And the president told us either about some other things or what he thought about that stuff. But the point is that the communication, well, I guess it's not that the communication was two-way, although they do point that out. But the president asked us for information, and we gave him this information. We gave it to him so he could make a decision about whether or not to go forward with the nomination. And that's a constitutional function. And if the president's communications with the rest of the government, the other branches, advisors, etc., that he seeks out in pursuit of his fulfillment of his constitutional obligations was constantly subject to revelation to the public, well then, you would have a big problem and nobody would communicate with the president about those things, and you prevent him from doing it. It's very interesting. I mean, it's a half of it is a legit argument that yes, you shouldn't be able to necessarily uncover with a FOIA request every communication that the president has, particularly these most sensitive ones. But it's an oddball, let's say, mildly speaking, of an expansion of the doctrine to say that, well, because a thing was communicated to the president, it cannot be revealed. I mean, they may end up being right in all of this. And of course, we should probably also note that it's entirely possible that all of the information conveyed to the White House was in fact exculpatory. But that is a matter of principle. They don't want to reveal it because they want to maintain the strongest possible interpretation of the presidential communications privilege here, which is not out of the question. It is a thing that prior White Houses and prior administrations have occasionally done, but only because typically they didn't stand in such poor stead with the public on such a hot button issue. And of course, they had regard for the state of the law and the Constitution and the future and the prerogatives of the presidency beyond their own administration. And it's very difficult to believe that that's the case with this administration. Almost assuredly not the case. But, very circular. Because the White House asked us for the information and we gave it to them, therefore it became part of our communications with him and you can't have it. That's interesting. And sometimes that actually holds up in court. We may never get this information, but it is interesting that it certainly hints that there is a lot more salacious stuff out there, at least, as they say, related to his youth. And I don't know that it is entirely unrelated to his continuing to serve in office, considering, the Supreme Court kind of gets their hands on every sort of case. It will be relevant, I am sure, to many parties before the court, whether or not you can trust that Judge Kavanaugh has, let's say, that he shares a modern interpretation of what constitutes, sexual misconduct, for instance. That might become an issue at some point, but I guess Well, we always figured we'd probably have to live with that. And it looks like we may, unless anybody can figure out a way around this, or you get a very sympathetic judge. And I don't know who's handling this case, but if they were to decide, for instance, that this was too broad an application of presidential communications and you can't just pass back and forth files full of evidence of your criminal wrongdoing and protect it that way, well, then maybe. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Well, all right. I think that we're going to have to leave that one there until we find out what the judge wants to do with it. But, yeah, I mean, as crazy and circular as the reasoning sometimes gets, they usually provide pretty broad discretion and broad cover to the president on these things. I mean, certainly if anyone has lost the privilege, it would be this White House. But on this particular case, I think they might decide to let things lie. And, well, in all likelihood, it will take, a leak or some other bombshell otherwise coming out in order to contest this any further. But I did see the article first came to my attention as I watched people tweeting about it say that, their takeaway from it was that, okay, this is an admission, a tacit admission by the FBI, that there's a lot more information out there about Kavanaugh than they released. And I don't see anything in the article that helps the FBI argue that no, there isn't. It's just that they argue, well, two things. One, that the other information they gathered is from his, relevant to his youth and not to his public service. And two, that we can't tell you about it anyway because we took the wise precaution of packing it up and sending it to the White House and therefore hiding it under the presidential communications privilege. And reminds me a little bit of the sort of legal trick that, maybe you've gleaned it, even if you're a non-lawyer, from the movies or maybe from bitter personal experience. Perhaps you've heard of the tactic of when couples are approaching divorce proceedings. Sometimes when you hear about one of the spouses saying that I hired a real shark lawyer and he gave me this great advice, go and meet with all the other top divorce attorneys in the area. Consult with them and consult with them as though you were interested in hiring them. I mean, you're not supposed to advise people to consult with attorneys with the specific plan in mind that they aren't really going to hire them, and therefore, well, you'll hear why in a second. But if you have an initial consultation with a lawyer about your divorce, even if you don't hire that lawyer and you opt to go with someone else, if your spouse were to come to them seeking representation, that lawyer, by the ethical canons, would have to recuse himself from taking such a case. Would have to turn the case down because they already have a confidential relationship, even though they've not been hired as an attorney. They consulted in a confidential manner about that very case with the other party to this case, and that creates a conflict of interest, and they're conflicted out and they can't do it. So if you go and meet with, if you live in a small enough town, you live with, and you meet with the top 3, whatever, pick your number, of divorce attorneys in the area, and you opt to hire the one you wanted to hire. The other 2 really good ones are not available to your spouse. So there you go. Devious legal advice. Don't take it as legal advice. I don't offer it as legal advice. Not permitted to do so anyway. We don't have a relationship, you and I, whoever we are listening, as a legal matter. As a matter of legal representation. It would get me in trouble if I offered you that kind of legal advice at all, and over the radio, certainly not a good idea. Anyway, the point is that, yes, occasionally lawyers come up with these interesting tricks to use the laws that and ethical canons that are meant to keep them on the straight and narrow, and instead use it for tactical advantage for various reasons, and not always for the reasons stated. Okay, next up, I wanted to move on to, as a topic anyway, I thought it would be worth bringing this up. I'm sure we'll discuss it a little more next week, perhaps Wednesday when we talk to Joan again. Bloomberg piece here, Congress considers delaying spending talks until after impeachment, which I guess tells us a little bit about the timeline they might be considering for actually moving on, I guess, on actual articles of impeachment as opposed to the ground rules that they were discussing yesterday. Let's see, they've got some bullet points up at the top of the piece here. Some spending negotiators favor stopgap bill into February. That would be a continuing resolution that would take us to February. McConnell and Hoyer push for a resolution to the budget impasse now, however. So we'll see who wins out in all of this. Democrats and Republicans in Congress are deliberating whether to push the deadline to fund the government into early February to avoid having a budget fight amid an impeachment inquiry into President Donald Trump that's set to stretch into at least December. That would mean enacting another stopgap spending bill to avert a government shutdown when the current short-term funding runs out on November 21st, as Joan told us the other day, assuming the 2 sides won't be able to agree on a budget plan by then. Senate Appropriations Chairman Richard Shelby, a Republican, has floated the idea of a stopgap spending bill until February, almost a fending bill until February, perhaps. Though he said Wednesday he hasn't discussed it with Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. I think that's a pretty realistic assessment of where we are today, said Shelby. Miracles do happen, but I haven't seen a lot of them around here. House Democrats on the Appropriations Committee are also weighing a February stopgap, lawmakers and aides say. Trump's insistence on funding a wall on the southern border is again hanging over the funding decisions in Congress as Democrats and Republicans negotiate 12 annual spending bills. An impasse over the border wall led to a 35-day partial government shutdown early this year. After it ended, Trump used emergency powers to raid military construction accounts to fund the wall. Everyone remembers that one, I think. When Shelby floated the idea of a stopgap bill until February, he said impeachment would take the oxygen out of the Capitol. But Democratic Representative David Price, a member of the Appropriations panel, said Trump's continued demand for money to build a border wall is the problem. That's true, too. Shelby can blame impeachment all he wants, but it is their allocations that is standing in the way. Price of North Carolina said, if not for this wall issue, we could get this done tomorrow. Well, we will see about that. Actually, it's tomorrow now. So what do you think? Did they get it done? I guess not. I could see where Steny Hoyer and McConnell are going with this. And I think, I think I agree. I think it would be better if they could get the spending provisions done. If they could get the budget taken care of now, and then there was no reason to call for a specific end date on the impeachment proceedings, and I think those things should drag out forever. Once they've started anyway. Then that would be much better. If they could complain that the budget isn't getting taken care of all along the way, that would only make things more muddled at the very. Of course, they could. Once they've sent out articles of impeachment from the House is then free to deal with the budget. The Senate would be tied up. But, well, I don't know. The Senate really isn't supposed to act first on these things either. That would be convenient if they could. Let's continue on here. House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell are said to oppose a long stopgap in order to try to force a spending deal sooner. Hoyer wrote to McConnell on Tuesday to urge immediate talks on spending. Let's immediately talk, everybody. Republicans want to replenish the $7 billion in military funds that Trump redirected toward construction of the border wall. Ooh, I think I oppose that. Although it is very necessary. That's the Democrats' dilemma in all of this. On the one hand, they should, well, the White House and Republicans should squirm under the, they should struggle with the fact that military members are suffering from having their money stolen from them by Trump's emergency border wall order, and they shouldn't be relieved of that pressure anytime soon. But as Democrats, we know that if these projects are in fact important priorities for anyone, but in particular, I guess, for our military, if that's what sends a tingle up your leg, then you're going to want to see those priorities funded, even if it lets the pressure off of Trump. Although, I don't know. I guess I'm maybe more inclined to let Republicans squirm. I mean, Trump won't. He doesn't care about anybody. All right. So let's see. Republicans want to replenish the $7 billion that was stolen. Democrats say they won't refill those accounts without provisions to guard against future shifting of funds. Yeah, how would you like that? You vote to replenish it and then he just steals it again. Because, well, why wouldn't he? I mean, he stole it last time, right? And that satisfied him enough to allow the government to reopen. He would just steal the same money you replenished. And why would he believe you if you complained about it? Senate Republicans are also seeking $5 billion in new money for the wall. This already delicate negotiation is further complicated by the impeachment process that has enraged Trump and heightened partisan acrimony on Capitol Hill. By the way, just a reminder. So $7 billion stolen. They want to replenish that money. They're also looking for another $5 billion in new money. That's $12 billion that Mexico has so far forgotten to send us somehow. Senate Minority Leader Charles Schumer said Tuesday he was worried that Trump could use the November 21st deadline to provoke a shutdown to distract from impeachment. I don't think it will distract from impeachment. I just think it'll compound the problem of impeachment. But okay. I'm increasingly worried that President Trump will want to shut down the government again because of impeachment, Schumer said. He always likes to create diversions. Republicans and Democrats in Congress say they don't want another government shutdown, although they also said that when government funding ran out at the end of 2018. It didn't make much of a difference. They don't want it. It just happened. I mean, it happened because they didn't do anything about it, but you understand the dynamics of that. The Senate and the House, both led by the GOP at the time, were on the brink of a deal in December when Trump persuaded House Republicans to hold out for wall funding. They so smart, these people. The House has already passed its 12 appropriations bills. Yes, Joan mentioned that. Good work. And the Senate this week is on track to pass a package of 4 spending bills that would fund Interior and Environment, Commerce, Justice and Science, that's the third, and then Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development. Oh, and Agriculture. Why have I got that? So 4, Interior and Environment, 1, Commerce, Justice, and Science, 2, Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development, 3, there we are, and Agriculture, number 4. They have odd groupings. It's not just one department per bill. This Senate measure would need to be reconciled with the House versions, of course, to become law. The most important thing for spending committee leaders is to agree on the top line allocations of spending for all government agencies. Senate Democrats say they'll block debate on the annual defense spending bill, the top Republican priority, until they reach a deal on total allocations. You may recall, as Joan was saying, that there is in place an agreement to have parity between defense spending and domestic discretionary spending. And I guess they think Republicans are not living up to that bargain, and this is how they'll flex their muscle on that. This week will bring a litmus test. Are Washington Democrats so concerned by impeachment that they cannot even fund our men and women in uniform? McConnell said Tuesday. It's hard to imagine a more basic legislative responsibility than funding the Department of Defense. Although it's actually pretty easy to think of a parallel situation. You stood idly by while your president stole $7 billion from our men and women in uniform and the projects that they needed to continue to do their jobs, keep their families safe and comfortable while they do it, et cetera, et cetera. But no news here. Mitch McConnell is a gigantic hypocrite and an a-hole, and we all know that that's the case. I just thought I should remind you because it's Friday. Okay, time for one more deliverable that I promised you because I was going to do you a favor. I think Kate Sherrill sent us this one, and I think we did include it in one of the roundups, but we really should give it a closer reading, or at least a closer skimming. Exclusive: White House ignored Pentagon warning on Ukraine funding. This in Just Security. Kate Brannon is the author of this piece, and let's see if we can't get through the top of it. The real meat of it is at the bottom, but you got to have the setup. As the summer wore on, very florid beginning here, and President Donald Trump would not budge on his decision to withhold almost $400 million in military aid for Ukraine, the Pentagon warned the White House if its portion of the money wasn't released quickly, the Defense Department, and they had the greater tranche of it, right, would not be able to spend it before the fiscal year ended on September 30th. The Pentagon even gave the White House a deadline. In late July, as panic spread within the administration over the president's worrisome decision, and his horrible phone call, of course, the National Security Council led a series of interagency meetings to discuss what to do about the military assistance to Ukraine. At one of these meetings, Defense Department officials told the White House that if the $250 million in security assistance was not released by August 6th, and it wasn't, right, then it would not be able to spend it all by the end of the fiscal year, according to two sources familiar with the deliberations. That's important. The Defense Department's message was clear. If the White House didn't act, the Pentagon would be left with unobligated funds, money that would return to the U.S. Treasury and never make its way to Ukraine. But at least it would be in the Treasury and not be stolen by the OMB guys. And this article answers some of that question, or at least hints at what the answer is. Remember my question about what happened to that money? And the Pentagon was also clear that providing Ukraine the security assistance was in the national security interests of the United States. On that point, Trump's cabinet agreed. At every meeting, the unanimous conclusion was that the security assistance should be resumed, the hold lifted. Bill Taylor, the top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine, said in his opening statement to House investigators last week. As for corruption, the pretext being given for why the funding was being withheld, the Pentagon had certified in May that the, quote, government of Ukraine has taken substantial actions to make defense institutional reforms for the purposes of decreasing corruption and increasing accountability, unquote. When asked over the summer to perform an analysis of the effectiveness of the military aid, the Defense Department took 1 day, you remember this, to conclude the assistance was effective and should be resumed, Taylor testified. Now, these are outs for bureaucratic actors that they take advantage of all the time. Well, you have to certify that it's effective. Fine, I certify it. Based on what? Based on I say so. But still, they were doing it. It was very important to them that this money move. In late July, the Pentagon also alerted the White House that if the funding wasn't released in time, the Pentagon would be at risk of violating the Impoundment Control Act. Remember that? We learned about that from Lawfare, which punishes the executive branch when it doesn't spend money that Congress has appropriated, the sources said. But the White House did not heed the Pentagon's warnings. It continued to withhold the money through August and into September. But the pressure was mounting. Behind the scenes, the White House could see a storm brewing over Trump's decision. On August 12th, a whistleblower inside the intelligence community filed a complaint flagging Trump's disturbing phone call with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and raising questions about why the security assistance was being delayed. On August 26th, the Intelligence Community Inspector General, Michael Atkinson, having determined that the complaint was credible and met the legal definition of an urgent concern, forwarded it to Acting Director of National Intelligence Joseph McGuire, expecting him to transmit it to Congress. Instead, McGuire consulted with the Justice Department and the White House, which at some point before September 9th directed McGuire not to share the complaint with the Congressional Intelligence Committees. In the meantime, Politico broke the news on August 28th that Trump was withholding the Ukraine money, immediately prompting outcry on Capitol Hill, with lawmakers from both parties asking what's going on. On September 9th, the House Foreign Affairs, Intelligence and Oversight and Reform Committees announced they were investigating the Trump-Giuliani Ukraine scheme, as they called it, including Trump's decision to withhold security assistance to Ukraine in defiance of explicit congressional direction. And in the Senate, Senator Dick Durbin was reportedly threatening to withhold $5 billion in Pentagon funding for next year unless the Ukraine money was released. With Congress growing irate and the fight over the whistleblower complaint about to break out into the open, Trump finally gave permission to release the Ukraine funding, allegedly. On September 11th, the State Department notified Congress that the $141 million worth of military equipment for Ukraine would resume. And how do we know that? Well, we don't. All we have here, all that's linked here, is a tweet from Ryan Brown, CNN national security reporter, dated September 12th, that said, the State Department notified Congress Wednesday that it will obligate $141.5 million in foreign military financing for Ukraine. This is separate from the $250 million in Ukraine security assistance funds that have been held up by the Trump White House, the DOD money. That comes next in the paragraph from Just Security. The next day, it was reported that the hold on the $250 million of military assistance from the Defense Department had also been lifted. That a Defense News link that just basically asserts White House releases $250 million in Ukraine military aid. No production of paperwork there, but routine business for the reporters. But, by now we've learned our lesson, and you should really be, why you shouldn't demand the paperwork and embed it in Scribd inside your articles, I do not know. And unless you see that paperwork, you should just say that it's purported to have been released. Back to Just Security. At the time, a senior administration official told the Washington Post that the determination to release the money was motivated by the fiscal year's looming close on September 30th. Again, reminder, the Pentagon had pegged August 6th as the last day that they could release the money and actually get it all spent and allocated before the end of the fiscal year. Yes, you could release the money on September 11th, September 12th. That's prior to September 30th. All that means, though, is it could only partially be spent before September 30th rolls around, at which point the unspent, unobligated money returns to the Treasury. The net effect of which is Ukraine doesn't get the money it was promised. So recognize the difference between those two dates, September 30th and August 6th. August 6th was their last chance to possibly get all that money spent. September 30th was the last chance to even send a penny of it to Ukraine before it went back to Treasury. At this point, it was widely assumed, good word, that with Trump's granting of permission, which was also assumed, the funding had been fully restored. But the Pentagon knew the White House had waited too long, ignoring its August 6th deadline. Halfway through September 11th and 12th, when that money was released, there was no way the Pentagon was going to be able to get all of the funding out the door before the fiscal year ended. I do not know the logistics of it, but I know that they do, and they tend to be serious about that when they put those dates on. I don't know what it takes to get that money spent and obligated and out the door, and why you need a month and a half to do it, but that's what they say. Logistics of everything are fascinating when you look deep down into them. So anyway, this is important news and an important nuance that I think was mostly lost in the regular newspaper reporting. The White House had time to resolve any issues, but apparently ignored the deadline, putting the funding at risk, said Sam Berger, who served at the Office of Management and Budget during the Obama administration and is now Vice President for Democracy and Government Reform at the Center for American Progress. This is further evidence that the aid was withheld for political reasons, not policy concerns. With time running out, the Defense Department had to rely on Congress for help. The best opportunity to address the problem was with the 7-week continuing resolution spending bill, which was being drafted on Capitol Hill to avert a government shutdown. Remember, that's the one that we learned from Joan the other day, had extended government funding for, what was it? They said 7 weeks to November 21st, the one under which we're currently working, but which, like we have mentioned, threatens another shutdown unless they can come up with yet another one or finish all the budget before November 21st. Now, in response to inquiries made by appropriators while the CR was being drafted, the Pentagon alerted Congress that it would not be able to spend all of the money, the Ukraine money, by September 30th. Evan Hollander, Communications Director for the House Appropriations Committee, told Just Security. Appropriators worked with the Defense Department on crafting a last-minute legislation, or legislative fix, I guess I'll say, that could be added to the CR that would extend the deadline the Pentagon would have to spend the Ukraine money and prevent it from running afoul of the law, the Impoundment Act, right? The final CR included language that essentially rescinded the money that the Pentagon was unable to spend and then reappropriated it, putting time back on the clock for the Pentagon to supply Ukraine with what it needed. So a clever fix, right? A nice patch, but essentially what happens here is that the CR under which we're currently operating rescinded the unspent money, which was probably almost all of it at that point, that should have been released on August 6th, but wasn't released until September 11th and 12th. Rescinding it means basically taking it out of circulation, undoing the appropriation. So in order to make the appropriation to Ukraine, how do you like this for bureaucracy? They had to unmake the appropriation for Ukraine and then remake it in the CR. So the Defense Department did not provide a precise amount at that time, but $35.2 million was rescinded and reappropriated, Hollander said. So they didn't have to take all of it. There was $400 and something million, $35 million or so needed to have this fix. So I guess that means that something in the neighborhood of almost the full $400 million, maybe 390 or so, actually got obligated and spent in some way in that little bit of time between August 6th and September 12th. But God knows what they had to do. If they thought they needed a month and a half to do it the first time, but in just a couple of weeks, they managed to push almost $400 million out the door. I don't know whether they got the best bang for their buck on that. Money lost to corruption. What a weird thing to have happen as between Ukraine and the United States. The Pentagon, anyway, hasn't clarified this with any additional comment. In the end, and only with congressional help, the Pentagon appears to have avoided violating the Impoundment Control Act. So congratulations to you on that. But let's see. However, the release of the funding in September did not address all of the potential legal violations at play. The very act of holding the money in the first place could itself have violated the Impoundment Control Act because the White House did so without congressional approval or notification. Yes, that can be a bit of a problem. The Trump administration did not follow the Impoundment Control Act notification requirements when they held up Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative funding, and actions to delay this and other international assistance funding appear to be clear violations of the law, Hollander said. In the end, it's clear that the Pentagon's warning to the White House over the summer went ignored, revealing just how much the White House was willing to risk with its Ukraine pressure campaign. That is pretty astounding, quite honestly, and more than a little worrisome. And I'd be curious exactly what the language of the Senate CR was. I have more from Defense News on that one. It's linked in the article, so when you take a look at that, you can review it for yourself, see whether they address it at all in this thing. But how about that for wrapping it all up in everything? And here we are, of course, facing impeachment and other members of Congress and the president himself saying, oh, we're not going to be able to, the government might shut down, you see, because we're going to be distracted by impeachment. And we're only wrapped up in impeachment because the president played stupid games with the appropriations that were supposed to go out the door by August 6th. So pretty amazing. I guess that minimizes the opportunity for the OMB guys to simply have absconded with the money. But who knows whether that $36 million made it out the door or not. And who knows what that means for future help for Ukraine
From
next
Daily
year.
Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
So thanks, Kate, for sending us that. Very informative. And, of course, as always, stay tuned next for Justice Putnam's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Of course, having pre-recorded this, I can't tell you exactly what he's going to be getting to, but given the time restraints I usually impose on myself, that doesn't happen all the time anyway. See you next week.